You so much for joining us today for the MVLRI Research Webinar Series. We're glad that you could take some time. I know it's right before the holidays and everyone's busy and excited to go on break, but we really appreciate you being here and taking the time with us today. We're going to be talking about the Teacher Guide to Online Learning, and we have Becky Stimson, who is in her 5th year as Senior Writer and Publication Manager for the Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute. And we also have Rebecca Parks, who is an Assistant Professor at Mansfield University in Pennsylvania and an MVLRI Fellow. So they are going to be going over the teacher guide, and I will let them get started because that's who you're here to listen to, not me. So take it away, Becky and Becky.
Thank you. Becky, we can't hear you. Were you going to start with this?
All right.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, sorry. Welcome everyone. Welcome Stacy and my teammates and whoever may be listening to this in the future. As Kristen said, we're going to be talking about the Teacher Guide to Online Learning, and I was just going to start with a little bit of background. The Teacher Guide is the 4th guide that Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute and Michigan Virtual have published, and is obviously the guide for teachers. All of these guides that are listed here on this page are intended for people who have little or no familiarity with online learning, and so we've created these guides so that people have some foundation for making decisions or for operating within their role. I'm going to put I see that Kristen has put the link in there. Thank you, Kristen. Excuse me, you'll see that the Administrator Guide to Online Learning is in process. That's something that we expect to have done in February. The School Board Guide to Online Learning we just published earlier this fall. So with that, just as a little bit of context, so that you know that there are a number of resources out there that are for specific audiences, but in general about online learning and what it entails, and touching on best practices are there for your review. So now to Becky to get into the guide a little bit.
Sure. Thanks, Becky. Becky and Becky. It's confusing, isn't it? So yeah, as Becky just said, we are looking at the teacher to online the teacher guide, excuse me, to online learning, and I am looking. Okay, here we go. The working definition of online learning we actually took directly from the iNACOL definition. Just stating here, I'm going to just read it to you. Online learning is characterized by a structured learning environment to enhance and expand educational opportunities, providing instruction that is teacher-led and may be synchronous, where communication in which participants interact in the same time space, such as video conferencing, or asynchronous, where communication is separated by time, such as email or online discussion forums, and access from multiple settings in the school building or out of the school buildings. So you can see that the working definition of online learning is quite broad. As Becky said, the reason for this guide and all of the guides is for people who have little or no familiarity with online teaching, online learning, this one specifically for teaching. So that's why we wanted to start off with this working definition. And then the next slide, you're going to see we talk a little bit about some of the similarities of what a lot of us are familiar with, because that's how we were educated in our traditional face-to-face brick and mortar type school experiences versus online teaching. And the similarities are that the teachers really are still the expert in the field. And that you want to build relationship with students, that you evaluate student performance through different types of assessments, formative, summative assessments, that we really develop the supplemental materials. We get a curriculum oftentimes. Back in our day and age, it would be, textbooks or things like that. We can still use that in the online learning environment, but yet the teachers are the ones that really take those textbooks and make it come to life. And that's the same thing in an online environment, and that we really do want to make those connections to the real world. So there's not a whole, in that sense, it's still teaching, it's still education, it's still learning. Those components are all still there. You have a teacher, you have students, you have all of those components. But there are obviously some differences as well. Here you have in the online teaching environment, we have a lot more individual contact with students, as opposed to a classroom with 20 or 30 students, or sometimes even more than that, where you're teaching to everybody and you're interacting, and there's, you know, sometimes depending on where you are or what grade you're teaching or what subject you're teaching, there may be a lot of goings-ons in that classroom. Where in the online teaching environment, you really do have a lot more individual interaction and communication with the students, and that's really done largely through email, through phone calls, through text messaging, a lot of electronic uses. You can do that through your LMS, your learning management system, video conferencing. A lot of teachers that I was speaking with talk about how they try to do video conferencing, some even as much as at least once or twice a week. Some can't get to it that often. Sometimes they'll just video their own lessons or themselves to make them appear or to be real, to show, yes, I am a real person, I'm not a robot. But we also, the difference is that it's that individual through that graded feedback too. We need to, we're going to talk a lot about feedback and good communication later on, but that's really the way that we will communicate with our students. We do have increased opportunities for individualized instruction because of that individualized contact. So we can really see where a student might be struggling and really be able to teach to those areas of needed improvement. But we can also really praise and explore and go deeper and wider, if you will, with their learning. The difference too is that school is quote unquote open 24 hours a day, meaning students can work at any time of the day or night in an asynchronous environment. The students in many cases are assigned a mentor that will also sort of be a liaison between that student and the school and the administrator and the teacher. And there's a lot, and actually if you look at the mentor guide, you'll see a lot of information in there too. And then the next three is really depending on the online learning model. There is open and ongoing registration, which means that students can enter your classroom at any time. It's not always the very first day of school. It could be mid-semester, and so you have to meet them where they are at. The student does have a lot of autonomy of their lessons. In other words, they may, depending again on the online learning model, they may be able to skip around a little bit. They may be able to say, you know what, I'm going to work on this lesson and this lesson and this lesson today, and then for 2 days not work, and then another day maybe work on 5 lessons, or skip around a little bit. And so that means that the teacher really has to be careful to make sure that the students are staying on task, that they're not getting ahead or falling behind or leaving. So you really have to really watch that too. And then also the content is already created for you. And in speaking with the teachers, there's some great things about that and some not so great things about that. But really the great part of that is that you really get to focus again on those learning needs, on the needs of the students. So the content is there. But yet now you get to teach to the ability of each of your students. So, and also you can really kind of do some follow-up. You can do a lot of grading. You can do, like I said, a lot of that individualized instruction. So there's really some great positives to the online teaching environment, but it does take a little getting used to if you're just starting out. But then you ask, well, why do teachers choose online learning? Yes.
Becky, can I add something?
Yes, please.
You may have commented on this before I logged back in and got my microphone back, but just a little bit more context. We developed this guide using 2 courses that Michigan Virtual Student Learning Services folks created and Professional Learning Services folks created. One being the orientation program for our educators, who are people fresh out of college or pretty fresh out of college who have not had an online teaching experience, who join us for a 2-year session where they are mentored by experienced online instructors. There are things that you can, we have a series on the iEducators that I'll put the links in the chat box. And then the other class was the course that is offered to new hires who teach for Michigan Virtual. In addition to, so much of the content of most of the content of the teacher guide comes from those two courses. That content having been created by instructors who are quite experienced, excuse me, and successful in teaching online. The other thing, though, was that Becky did these interviews. She's referenced a couple of times the teachers that she talked to. She interviewed teachers from a number of members of the Virtual Learning Leadership Alliance, Georgia, Idaho, Wisconsin, Michigan, and a couple of some of our teachers. So just so that you know that the content of the guide itself comes from the people who do the work. Becky, did you want to say anything else about that?
Absolutely. The boots on the ground. I think that that's important to recognize. Thank you for reminding me of that, Becky. It really, the boots on the ground, it's getting the people that have been doing this for several years. One of my favorite questions was, now that you've done this for several years, what is something, if you went back to your very first day, that you would tell yourself? And it was really interesting to hear the feedback. And I think Becky and I tried to really embed those quotes into a lot of the content here, and not just the quotes, but even their ideas and their beliefs and their expertise in this field. So we worked really hard to try and embed that in, sometimes in direct quotes, sometimes just within the content of the guide itself. So thank you for reminding me of that, Becky. So with that being said, we ask then, well, why do teachers choose online teaching? There's a lot of wonderful things like we just talked about here, the differences or the similarities, but the differences might appeal to you and might not appeal to you. But generally what we see is that, well, there's some life changes that happen. Maybe somebody just had a baby but still wants to be active and working, or maybe there's a parent that lives at home with the teacher now, but he or she needs to care for that adult but yet still wants to stay in the field. We have no idea. There's lots and lots of reasons for that. Perhaps they moved far away and now, driving 90 minutes to get to the school is no longer feasible. So it might be that an online environment is a better option for them to still stay in their profession. Some teachers just really wanted to try a whole new modality of teaching. Let's try this. This sounds pretty interesting. It sounds pretty cool. The other thing that we get the opportunity to do as an online educator is really reach a wide demographic of students from all over. Although I didn't really interact with this particular group I'm talking about right now for this guide, but I met people. I went to a conference a couple years ago that were teaching in Alaska, and there they have villages of 100 or 150, but yet they were reaching people throughout the entire state, and I just find that to be pretty awesome. So they just wanted to reach a wider demographic of students, or maybe even somebody who's really wants to focus in a specific subject area that teacher can really present to them. Some teachers are just really encouraged to teach online. I say encouraged, truly encouraged, and sometimes teachers find themselves sort of forced into it, I guess is the best way to say it. And then they're sort of like, well, now what? What do I do? And I think that's another wonderful thing, that we have these guides out there to say, okay, now what? What do I do? How do I do this? Where do I go from that? So we have to be really honest about that too. And then also just the idea of having flexible working hours and a supplemental income, because it's not this particular guide, although we can focus on the full-time online school, we can also talk about how it's also supplemental. And we'll talk about that maybe later as we get into the slides. So let's talk a little about the online teaching and learning environment, just the basic space, the physical workspace, the digital workspace, all of those things. If we're going to get started on this, what does it look like? What do I need to do? And so we got some real practical ideas from the two courses that Becky was talking about, and also from the teachers directly. Organizing your physical workspace. What does that look like? Well, it can really run the gamut. Some people will just work at their dining room table, where others will have, a designated office or an office space, or possibly even a whole different location outside of their home. But the truth is, best practices talk about designing a physical workspace with minimal distractions. So what does that look like? Well, that might mean having some type of a private space, preferably with a door so that you can separate yourself from family life. I'm currently in my home. I'm working in my office area. I'm praying my dog doesn't start barking. And that's one of the things that we have to think about, is your dog going to start to bark, or is your child going to start to whine? And so you really want to make sure you have that space where you're really, really working and focusing as if you were in your physical classroom. Having bright light, but indirect, and that's a physical thing. You don't want that direct light right into your eyes. You're working on the computer the majority of the time, so make sure you're getting good glasses and all of those things. Obviously, having high-speed internet service with malware, the antivirus software, all of those things to protect everything that you are doing in your classroom, in your LMS, in your environment. You want to there's pros and cons to this. I love having an adjustable desk, one of those standing desks, having some kind of a supportive chair and a footrest so you can lean back if you want. Not everybody wants that, but make sure you get something that you really like to be at for a long period of time. This type of teaching is a lot different than a classroom teaching where you're standing up, walking around, doing other things. You're really sitting and focused on your computer a good portion of the day. So make sure whatever you have is super comfortable for you, but also gives you the right support, because you don't want to get worn out. And sitting with good posture. That's very important. I just the other day saw, I'm going off task here a little bit, but just the other day I saw something, and I don't know how it works, but it's a little, I don't know, it's like a little Fitbit or something that they put on your back, and it will start to vibrate if you're slouching over it. I thought, well, that's really interesting, but after the fourth or fifth time I would get annoyed and want to tear it off. But truly, having good posture is extremely important when you're working at in your online classroom in that physical space. And then also making sure that you have ample supplies. Your office is your classroom. So you want to make sure if you need to print something out, that you have that paper, that you have pens, that you have notebooks, that you have all of that stuff right there on hand as if you would in a classroom environment. And then the next one is talking about your digital workspace. Oh, I'm sorry. And then the need to respect of workspace or work hours. We need to make sure, I missed that one, that the people in your home, if you have people in your home, understand this is my workspace, this are my work hours. Please do not disturb. That's a little harder to do when you have a dog, but hopefully he or she will also respect that as well. But again, now we're going to go to, oh, and I see some people check out Fitter First. That must be one of those vibrating things or something to help you with your posture. So let's talk about organizing your digital space. We want to make sure that your digital space promotes efficiency, that you're not having this just massive amount of folders or clutters on your screen that are going to distract you, or everything should have its place. I believe in my home, my daughter laughs at me, everything has a home and it belongs in its home. And so my daughter, if she'll leave something laying around, I'll say, Erica, where does this live? And she'll roll her eyes, but she'll put it where it lives. So it's a good thing. I think that's the same with our digital workspace. We need to have, everything should have a home. So clear your virtual desktop. Make sure you have that maximum system speed that you need. Create electronic folders using, it doesn't matter how you name them, but make sure that it's identifiable enough for you to know exactly where to go, how to get this, but also that you're consistent. So don't name one folder, starting with a date, and the next folder with a name. And I would be as consistent as you can. It makes it much easier. Scan paper documents and place them in e-folders. Sometimes we have so much paper clutter, and some people are really good at finding that. I'm not. So one of our best practices really is to just scan all of those documents and have them, because if for some reason you get coffee spilled on it or something happens, you'll always have a digital copy. Establish shortcuts or bookmarks for frequently used programs, folders, and websites. It's just going there very quickly. Being able to share something with a student immediately because you have that already bookmarked. It's so important to have. And then I believe, and a lot of the teachers that I spoke with talk about the use of an e-calendar, and especially those e-calendars that have those 15-minute or 30-minute reminders ahead of time. Don't forget you have to make a phone call to so-and-so, or don't forget you're doing a small group meeting at this time, and making sure that you're putting those deadlines on there and your priorities on there, so that you're organized as well, and you're also teaching your students how to be organized. And then organizing your email. You know, email is your primary source of communication in the online classroom. So we want to make sure that the way that you email is structured very, very clearly. And so some of the key strategies that I learned from a lot of the teachers is to develop a daily organizational and workflow strategy. When are you going to read email? When are you going to respond to email? Becky and I had a conversation earlier today about the difference between the students' needs and teachers' needs, and maybe the dichotomy, if you will, between the two. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But your strategy, when is it that you're going to read your email? When are you going to respond to your email? And is email reading and responding going to take away from your job of teaching? So having that in a calendar, having that priority, and knowing what you want to do and when you want to do it is extremely important. I believe using flags, and again, I'm pretty organized, but I also know that a lot of teachers had said too that flags or colored categories or labeled categories and other tools, anything that helps you keep emails organized and in order of importance. What do I need to respond to immediately? What can be put on the back burner for a day or two? Making sure that you're really doing that. Again, most of, if not all of your work will be done online through email. And so it's so critical that you have some kind of a good habit that you get into when you are teaching online, and especially in organizing your email. Consider archiving emails. So we want to clean up our inbox, but yet we know that there's so many important emails out there, or so many things that we want to hold on to. And instead of addressing all of these, folders or whatever, which you obviously can do. Don't know what happened there. I don't know. We moved forward for some reason. Instead of doing that, we really want to just archive those emails, because you can get to them again and still get them off of your inbox. So let's talk about your e-calendar and having a routine. That schedule management. Remember, school is open 24 hours a day, but we need to make sure that we have our own routine set as an online teacher. So what does that look like? Well, we want to, again, manage our time effectively, having some kind of a daily routine. At this time to this time, I'm going to check my email. This time to this time, I'm going to respond. From 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock, I'm going to grade, and then I'm going to bring in small groups. Whatever schedule works well for you, put that on your calendar. Note that. Share that out with people so that they know this is when I can respond to you, and so on. Develop and maintain and share your office hours with students, with parents and guardians, with mentors, and even with your colleagues. And just as we said, to have the people in your home be respectful of your workspace, sort of the same with your office hours too. During this time, I really can, meet with you, call me, contact me. Now, as a teacher, we all want to be there for our students, and we should. But there are times, and most of the teachers that I interviewed said, well, oftentimes if a student needs me, I'm going to be there. But sometimes they'll even admit that can throw them off course. So it is important to have a real schedule, a routine that you get into that they respect as well. But of course, those emergencies do come up. So we have to keep those things in mind. And here it is, where we're maintaining our boundaries. What serves as an emergency for real? And share that with your students. What is a real emergency and what isn't? What can you break your routine for? And make sure you know what that means. What does that look like for you? And share that out with people. And then one of the things is to establish those mental goals for the day. I love making lists. And sometimes if I go off my list, I write it down on my list so I can cross it off my list. I don't know if other people do that. I don't think I'm the only one that does. But those mental goals are very important. What is it that I want to do? What do I want to accomplish? What do I want my students to accomplish? How do I want to go about doing that? Establishing those goals is very important. And then classroom rules and procedures, because even though we're online, we're still a classroom. There's still a classroom that you have to run. There's still expectations. And it may look a little bit different, but yet we still have to be really, really clear about what our expectations are. So we want to set and communicate those expectations early on. What protocols will you use when you're starting off with an email, for instance? Are you wanting them to just start off with like, hey, how's it going? I want that, I want you to do this for me. Or are you going to establish the protocol of professionalism? Dear Dr. Parks, I would like, I'm trying to figure this out. This is what I need to have done. What are your expectations and online protocols? And establish that, set that up with the students early. Any of those rules, and this is teaching 101, keep your rules positive and short, because if you go into really long rules, nobody's ever going to remember them or learn them anyway. And then share and model appropriate behavior in the classroom. We want students to participate enthusiastically. If that's what you want, share that with them. Be enthusiastic. Make sure that, maybe you post a video of yourself, or maybe in your emails or your communication or something on your LMS chat board, you're just, you're very enthusiastic. Excellent job. Maybe thrown in an emoji or something like that. Always use encouraging and positive language, even if sometimes you just don't feel like it. Try so hard to be as positive as you can. And ask your students to ask questions and communicate effectively. What does that look like? We want to share that with them. We want to teach that, and we need to communicate that. In a world of texting and Twitter, where you only have so many characters, we need to teach our students how to communicate effectively and professionally. So we need to model that as well. And then also the teachers were talking about establishing a consistent method and format for submitting assignments. Depending on the school, the e-school that you work for, the online school that you work with, you may have a lot of autonomy in that. So how do you want your students to submit their assignments? What do you want them to put in there? Do you want them to put it into a Dropbox under a certain title? What works for you and what works for your students? And while they're learning that, while they're getting into the classroom, you might want to consider using some non-graded activities to submit work to the LMS. I know I spoke with one, and I think her work is highlighted. I know her work is highlighted. Caitlin, I think it was Skinner was her name. I can't recall it right now, but it's at the very back. And what she told me was amazing. She said, I do this so I can get what she does is she'll have an assignment. The very first assignment is getting on the same page. And she'll ask them questions. What is your name? What do you like to be called? What things do you like to do? What things do you, what are your favorite subjects? What things aren't your favorite subjects? What are some of the things you struggle with? Personal things, academic things, all of those things. And she says, then I want them to upload that to the Dropbox so that I can see that they do it. She said it's sort of a twofold thing. I get to know them, and I get to know them at a real personal level. I get to send them feedback and tell them about myself. But I also can say to them, aha, you know how to submit assignments, so that's not an excuse anymore. And I thought that was really quite clever. She's doing it in a real, very gentle way, if you will, but yet she can say to them later on, no, Joey, you actually do know how to submit this because you submitted the Getting to Know You page. And then if they're not submitting it, then she can go back and talk them through that. So I thought that was a really interesting purpose for that non-graded activity. And then obviously
I want to add Becky,
Yes.
that as Becky suggested, that document is at the back, that resource is at the back of the teacher guide for
Yes.
use. We took, I think she might have been with with Idaho, IDLA,
Mm-hmm.
or Montana, maybe it was. Anyway, we took all the references to the school out so that it can be copied and used.
Yes.
I also wanted to say, as long as I've interrupted, that this is the last time we're going to be using Adobe for our webinars. One of the reasons being that it changes the content, the look of the
Mm.
fonts and so forth in the slides. And I just wanted people to know that we knew that some things were wonky, but you can't fix them because Adobe has its own mind about those things. And I also just wanted to say this is going to be recorded and posted. I will put that link in the chat box. We have just 20 minutes left and a bunch of
Yes.
slides, so we're going to have to move a little faster.
We'll go through them. Yep, for sure.
Okay.
So, okay, so let's go on. To maintain a healthy life and balance and workload. Interestingly, we look at this work-life balance, and teachers will always say, I don't know that I do this well. This is the one area where every teacher said, I don't know that I do this well. So let's look at this, how to maintain a work-life balance. Well, we want to maintain a manageable work schedule, defining those work and non-working hours. Make sure that we're telling parents that, we're telling students that, but not feeling guilty when you're not at your computer. Because again, students might post something or have a question at 1 in the morning. The last thing you should be doing is picking up your phone and answering them at 1 a.m. That's your sleeping time, or at least it's my sleeping time. Don't feel guilt-free. Prioritizing your tasks, saying no to non-critical tasks, and giving yourself daily timeouts. You know, we have time in a physical classroom environment where we can just give ourselves timeouts or use the restroom or go for a walk or go talk to a colleague for a quick moment. Give yourself that ability to do that even in the home. And then create that separate work and personal email, phone, and social media. You do not always need to be connected to your work. You're allowed to say, okay, work is over, and now I'm going to be I'm going to be able to move to my personal time right now. And then most importantly is asking help when needed. In the online learning environment, you can feel isolated at times. So there's all kinds of other communities that I know we highlight in the teacher guide as well. There's the edweb.net. I think there's the ISTE community or educator PLN community. There's lots of communities out there outside of your own organization where you can feel connected as well. All right, so let's talk about the responsibilities of the online teacher. Obviously, communication is one of them, and then engaging students in the learning process. And so communication, effective communication promotes an effective learning environment. And so a lot of times people will talk about setting the tone with a welcome letter to both the students, the parents, and the mentor. And when we're setting the tone and sending out a welcome letter, even to the students, you want to show them, I'm not a robot. I really do exist. I really am a human being with feelings, with emotions, with a dog, with a daughter, with a husband, with, you know, this is where I live. This is my yard. This is my office. Feel free to do that as a, you know, in a video or in pictures or whatever works. But the same with the parents too. You want to make sure parents know that you are approachable, that you can answer their questions as well. That welcome letter really does set that tone. And then we want to make sure you're including group announcements in your course room, usually on a weekly basis is what we're hearing a lot in the field. Establish individualized communication, again, making sure that you're giving out your email, that you are talking to people through email, and maybe even picking up a phone or texting a student. And then social media, you know, social media is out there and we want to consider that. And depending on where you work or if you're allowed to, some people talk about social media as being a wonderful thing. And some say you have to be really, really cautious. And of course, I'm just saying that there are some social media concerns. And then most importantly, whatever you're doing, using the 4 Ps when communicating. Okay, Becky, what does the 4 Ps mean? Well, here it is. The 4 Ps of good communication, it's highlighted in our teacher guide. It's making sure that your communication, whether it's verbal or through a video chat or email, is personal, that you're welcoming them by their name, that you're polite, that you are always positive, even again when sometimes it's hard to be, and that you're professional, so that you're still modeling, you know, we may have a disagreement here, there may be some issue going on, but we're still going to be professional. We need to model that for our students, for our parents, for everyone. Teacher responsibilities are to foster classroom discussions, and that's how we get our students engaged in the course and the community, the online classroom community. So what does that look like? Well, one of the things, again, and this seems a little repetitive, but is providing model responses to demonstrate your expectations. What is it that you want their responses to look like? And then respond to posts, the posts that the students post in the course room. Be honest, but be respectful and polite. Remember those 4 Ps. Ask your students to support their opinions. Ask the students to evaluate the arguments. We can do that too. If somebody says yes and somebody says no, well, let's look at that. Why would that be? And then state their why when they're disagreeing. Oh, I think you're wrong. Okay, well, why do you think I'm wrong? Or why do you think that? And also to avoid generalizations. We really want to, this is an opportunity for us to really, as teachers, to really be able to bring out the uniqueness in individuals. And that's something I think is really unique to the online learning environment. We want to make sure that our responses are free of errors, just like we tried to do here in this PowerPoint, but it is a little wonky. We want to make sure to move the discussion forward, add and expand on comments, ask clarifying questions for deeper understanding. Again, this is something that we have the ability to spend more time on in the online environment than we might in a regular brick and mortar classroom with 40-minute or 50-minute classes, because you really can think about your responses before you put them in print. And then obviously, and again, Teacher 101, linking to prior knowledge, scaffolding our learning, making those personal connections, incorporating those key terms, vocabulary, concepts, anything that you're teaching, make sure we're making those links and scaffolding that instruction. And again, social media cautions, we've talked about this. If you're going to use social media, you want to make sure to obtain student permission. That you're never, obviously, seems like such a common sense thing, but if we don't say it, then we would be silly too. Never share student grades or personal information. If you're going to use social media within your course room, have your parents or guardians sign a release. And avoid those personal messages to students in social media. If you're going to do something, make sure it's very broad. And if you're going to use something like Snapchat or Instagram, which seems to be the thing right now in middle school and high school, make sure you're creating specific classroom teacher accounts that can be private even. And then, whoa, what just happened here? I don't know what just happened. Now it's going on its own. Becky, do you see it just going now? There we go. Okay.
I do. I did not do that. There's a little needle at the bottom that just shot across the screen. I was not touching it. But I guess that's the internal. Maybe it happens when Adobe knows you've got more slides than you have minutes left.
All right, I'm flying through that. Okay, so we're going to talk about making sure that our students that we're listening to the voice, that we're looking, I don't know what's going on, that we're looking at allowing the student to have a voice. Some of the coolest things about online learning is that introverted students are able to share their voices more readily. They are the ones that have such great ideas in their head, but they don't have the ability to speak out loud in a classroom. And in an online learning environment, they can write their ideas, and it's amazing to see them. And because then their input can be validated and recognized, and it really does increase that intrinsic motivation. All right, so let's move on to assessment and providing that meaningful feedback. And I know Becky wanted to share a little something about that in here, but let's talk about that. Effective feedback strategies will enable the instructor to identify individual learning needs and encourage students to participate at a higher level. And so we use the acronym REPLY. Make sure that your feedback is responsive, in a timely response. I'm going to have Becky talk about that in just a second. That it's effective, that we offer specific comments aligned to the objectives, that it's positive, again, going back to the 4 Ps, that we're using words that are encouraging and positive, that it's learning, that we include suggestions for improvement, and that we make it personal. So you can see REPLY, reply. And Becky, I'm going to have you share a minute just real quick about the response of providing a timely response, what you said earlier.
Sure. We've been doing some focus groups with students in what we have found to be successful online learning programs in Michigan. And the students, as a group, we've interviewed 6 groups of students, and almost every one of the groups has talked, at least 4 out of the 6 has talked about um, waiting for teachers to reply and waiting for teachers to grade things, not being able to proceed because teachers have not graded something in a timely fashion or responded to them in a timely fashion. And again, this is their perspective, but they comment on the fact that, you know, in a class, you can ask the question, the teacher answers it right there and then. They're very aware of the fact that this has to do with being an online course and not being face-to-face. But it's something that I think we need to emphasize more with teachers, because it is hard to tell, you know, he said, she said, or she said, she said, but almost all of the students in those 4 groups agreed that they were having a hard time getting timely feedback, and sometimes any feedback from their instructors. And so I can't believe that it's just their perception. I think there has to be something going on, and it's also clear it happens across courses, because those students are almost all of them taking different courses. So it's not an isolated situation, or it's not an isolated perception.
So in saying that, I think that response of providing a timely response might even be something that you as an online teacher may want to ask your students. What do you consider to be a timely response compared to what I consider? I may say I'll answer your email within 24 hours. What works for you? And then finding some kind of a compromise with that. I think that was an important piece that Becky had talked about. And then obviously our feedback. We want to make sure that we give praise, encouragement, but that we can also redirect and clarify when we have some questions. So what does that look like? Well, we want to be proactive. Again, responding to struggling students quickly. What does that mean? What does the word quick mean to us compared to our teachers? But we also want to make sure to celebrate those student achievements. We talk about that all the time, but truth be told, it's so critically important in the online learning environment, especially where students might even feel isolated and they're wondering, boy, am I doing a good job? What's going on? And then we want to be consistent. So we want to make sure we potentially making weekly phone calls or sending out weekly, praise reports or something like that. And highlighting different student work. You don't have to put their names in there. You may not want to, depending on the classroom culture that you have. You might want to share, this is some really great work I saw this week. Look at this piece, or look at this comment, or look at something like that. You can use student work as examples for teaching. Again, depending on your classroom community, whether you give them, whether you put their name on there or not, that's really a choice within your own community. And then how do we meet the needs of our 504 students and our IEP students and our struggling learners and our culturally diverse learners? Well, the IEP and 504 learners, again, depending on where you're teaching, are often identified by the school district or mentor, and then those modifications are shared with the online teacher. And the IEP and the 504 is right here. The IEPs, you would be getting those modifications, or what they consider, what modifications should be considered for those students. And really, it's a matter of, again, just individualizing the instruction. And many teachers were saying, it's kind of easier to do it that way because we don't have a full class. We can work to the needs of those students. When we have struggling learners, you want to make sure you have this a process in place to reach these struggling learners. And there is a process that is defined in our guide. It talks about activating prior knowledge. Starting first, okay, what do we know? Let's get right there at the baseline. Making those learning connections. So now this is what we know. Tell me what you think about this. How do you feel about that? What does, where do you see this fitting into our world? Making those connections. And then managing the learner's level. Looking at the instruction, saying, where can I start? Now that I know where that baseline is for the student, what is the next step? Not the next 10 steps, but the next step. And then modeling that desired response. You're seeing modeling on here a lot because it's so important, I think, especially in, well, in all learning environments, but especially in the online learning environment. And then providing multiple opportunities for guided practice. How can I help this student together? And using that gradual release in many ways. I do, and then we do together, and then you do. That's that gradual release process. And then also you can consider implementing the UDL, Universal Design for Learning. And for those of you that don't know what Universal Design for Learning, it's really it's this three bubble, I guess is how I like to call it, process, where you have multiple means of representation, sort of like differentiating, it's differentiating the instruction. How are we going to represent this? Multiple means of engagement. Are we going to do this through phone calls, through video conferencing, through email, through written work, through whatever that might look like? And then multiple means of expression and action. What are we going to ask our students to produce at the end? How are they going to express and show their understanding, prove their understanding, their level of mastery? And then our culturally diverse learners. We want to make sure, because again, we're reaching a gamut of learners in many cases when you're in the online learning environment, very diverse, very, very broad group. You want to make sure to avoid slang and getting rid of those culturally specific humor or references. It might be confusing to some. We want to make sure we're making our expectations about that online learning very clear, and that can really, really, really be done through modeling. Be accessible. Again, what does that mean to us compared to what that means to our students? But be accessible, be open to having those open office hours and even just chatting at times. Learn about those other cultures. Well, if you do that getting to know you activity that Caitlin Skinner had put at the end of our, that's shared at the end of our teacher guide, if you do something like that, ask questions about that, talk about that, get them involved. Avoiding generalizations about individuals based on superficial knowledge. We can do that all the time, sometimes not even intending to do that, but let's do our best to avoid that. And then again, understanding your target audience. If you're teaching ninth grade, we need to remember we need to talk ninth grade level. Let's just go on real quick. One of the dangers is copyright, fair use, and plagiarism when we're doing stuff online. So how can we look at this? Why do we make sure that we're not infringing on copyright? So here's some suggestions here. Link everything to a copyrighted source unless it violates those terms of use. And you can get that through your online, and there's all kinds of different sources that we've featured in the teacher guide, but that you can look for everywhere just to see, is this copyrighted? And if so, what do I do? Embed your YouTube videos. You can use copyright material without permission if it's covered under fair use. And I know that we have a fair use link in the teacher guide as well. And then always, 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 no matter what, cite your sources, always. But when you're in doubt, ask permission. Always ask permission. And preventing plagiarism in your classroom, you post those clear expectations and tell everybody what is it that you want them to do. How do you want to do that? Make sure that the students understand what plagiarism is and teach them how to cite their resources. Provide students and mentors your expectations for the assessment. Do you want phones, no phones, browsers closed whenever they're taking an assessment? What is it that you're demanding of them? Develop a good relationship with students, because then you can say, boom, you know what? I know that this doesn't sound like you're writing, or this does sound like you're writing. You'll get to know that. Emphasize learning and mastery over accountability and completion. We want to know that they understand the content more than just them getting it done. So we want to make sure to emphasize that. And then one of the things that a lot of the teachers said that I interviewed was, I always want to assume that it's my fault first before I accuse a student of that. But if you suspect plagiarism, consider doing a web search. Consider using software like Turnitin. Look at the time and date stamp, because if they're submitting a lot of assignments at the same time, there might be some inappropriate assignment sharing. And then ask student questions. Did you use a public computer and forget to log out and somebody else logged in and used your information? Is the author of the submission a relative? Is the final draft intended for submission, or was this just your guide? use those things, ask those questions before you immediately accuse students of plagiarism. But then most importantly, we all have that teacher radar. Trust your teacher radar. Here I'm just showing real quick, we're coming to a close, our standards for online education, because you know what, it might feel uncomfortable, but there are so many people and organizations out there that are making sure that your courses are good courses, that it really is quality standards, teacher standards, accreditation, and so on. So Becky, I'm going to have you take it from here for the next, 2 minutes?
All right. Well, just very quickly, we are in the process, I alluded to this, we're in the process of developing our next guide, which is the guide for administrators, guide to online learning for administrators, and that would include people like superintendents and principals and assistant principals and curriculum directors, the building level administrators, as well as the district level administrators. So that's due in February, and you can always watch our publications page, the Institute publications page, for any new documents and reports and research. And that is really it, and we are right at 3 o'clock. I've posted the link to the webinars and podcasts, and we appreciate those of you who were able to join us being part of this webinar. We always appreciate feedback, so please don't hesitate to let us know if you find something in any of the guides or reports that you'd like to pursue with us, or expand other ideas you might have for resources that we could provide. We appreciate that. Let me see. And as it says here, we do updated versions of all of those guides every year. So just stay tuned to, as I say, the publications page, which I will put in the chat box here. Any questions? Stacy, you are the last one standing, and Gemma. You are quite welcome. As I say, happy to have you here, and I'm just going to put in the box here our publications page address. There we go. And we look forward to, thank you, Gemma. Good to see you. And we look forward to using Zoom in the new year, so Yay. That maybe the presentations will look a little bit more consistent. And happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Take care. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Stacy. Stacy, we appreciate that. And as I say, please let us know if you have any feedback or suggestions.
Happy holidays. Bye-bye.
Bye.